I've lost sleep, energy, time over that damn hunk of silver.
Of the Westinghouse Electric and Manufacturing Company in East Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
God, that trophy. That damn trophy. Where do I even begin?
Fronteggiamo la sventura. Solo stelle, nulla più. Prova di coraggio, di virtù.
Nothing brings people together or makes friends so fast as bowling. So call a friend. Bowl Brunswick tomorrow.
We do apologize for the commercial interruption, folks. Hello and welcome to Sports Center. I'm your host, Jim Jamison. To my right is James Jimison, filling in for my normal co-host, Jam Jones, who's on assignment in
Zimbabwe.
James?
We have all the boxing, baseball, horse racing, and gridiron news that you could ever want, and more. It's like a freight train with no brakes, Jimbo. Just keeps on rolling.
Isn't that so? Today's date is September 17th, 1920. And to get things started, why not a joke? Bees and knees, aren't those delightful? Tell me, partner, what do you do to make a clean sock dirty?
Lay it on me, Jimbo. Tell me.
You offer it 5,000 big ones to throw the series.
Oh, isn't that the cat's pajamas?
Rumors are spreading across the great 48 states, much like the Spanish flu. The Kamitsky socks are covering up a whole lot more than just feet. A trial appears likely in the future.
Now let's move on to the grass and pigskin, because in the world of professional football, we have a massive development. I know, it's no college ball, but in a place called Canton, which itself is in a place called Ohio, a new group has come together. The American Professional Football Association. Swell. No one seems to care.
And switching gears again, partner, we still can't stop talking about it. The heavyweight champion of the world, Jack Dempsey, and his third round.
This good? You hear me?
Right here.
Yeah, no, they were great on the news. I always loved Jim Jamison growing up, and no, they're dead on correct there. The APFA, as it's been called, well, it wasn't quite a joke, but it was pretty funny early on. Of course, no one then could have known that 2 years later, they'd change the name of the thing to the National Football League. They were creating the NFL. I think it was, about a month before then? August 20th, I want to say. There was a small meeting. Only 7 guys there representing 4 different teams. Present was Jim Thorpe, the biggest superstar in the pro circuit, the biggest name in football, one of the biggest in pro athletics, and a player for the Canton Bulldogs, a pro football team that already existed and was like a dynasty without a home, beating almost all of the random unorganized teams they played against. And the Canton Bulldogs were owned by Ralph Hay, also present at the meeting today. In fact, it happened in an office in his Hupmobile showroom. That type of car, the Hupmobile, it's long extinct. It serves as a relic to the past, really. Looking at one, it just screams old school. That is what the NFL was built on. Not right on, but leaning on. The other guys were 2 for the Akron Indians, 2 for the Cleveland Tigers, and 1 for the Dayton Triangles. All 4 of these teams represented here today would be charter members of the APFA. They talked shop about a potential way to address the big problems in pro football, mainly how players were hopping team to team every week based on who offered more money, and that a lot of pro football players were college football players using fake names. They were close, on the verge. They tentatively agreed to a group name, the APFC, American Professional Football Conference. They weren't formed yet, nothing was official, they were just guys talking about forming, close to it. This was sort of the inception, and the idea was really born next month. On, September 17th, I think it was. Yeah, the 17th, in Ralph Hay's very same Hupmobile showroom in Canton, Ohio, a lot more people piled in. Here, they would officially form the APFA. The minutes from this very first meeting have been kept intact and are publicly available, so we know exactly what went down. First, as people started arriving, Ralph Hay quickly realized that his office conference room thing, it was not big enough to hold the crowd. He directed everyone to instead sit out in the showroom, where his large Hupmobiles took up most of the floor space. There were chairs laid out, though not nearly enough. Some sat on the floor or leaned against the cars. See? This league was formed leaning on Hupmobiles. There was also a bucket of beer and ice near the center of the room, free for anyone to enjoy. This is worth noting because almost exactly 8 months before this meeting, Prohibition went into effect in America. But as we know well, you can't remove alcohol from football. The official league minutes don't give an exact number of people present. It instead mentions representatives from 13 different pro football teams. I'd ballpark there was about 15 guys there. Only 2 teams that would play in the inaugural season of the APFA were not represented here at this meeting, those being the Columbus Panhandles and the Detroit Heralds. Between them and the 13 represented, that gives us 15 total teams. The 1920 APFA season only had 14 teams playing in it. We actually lost one during this meeting. The Massillon Tigers, like many of these teams, were an Ohio area squad that existed for years before this. They had been playing against a lot of these guys for a while. There was no real organization there. It was just kind of a few teams that liked playing each other over and over again, and whoever was the best called themselves national champions. Decades later, it would retroactively be named the Ohio League, but there was no league. This just makes it easier for us to group them together. Now, Massillon was one of the most well-respected pro-gridiron teams in the country. They won 5 championships in a row in the early 1900s. Just a couple years ago, they battled Jim Thorpe's Canton Bulldogs in what was billed as the Pro Football World Championship game. But despite success, they simply stopped making money. It was well understood they wouldn't be a part of this new league. Then, a man so unimportant to the story I won't reveal his name walks into the Hupmobile-filled room. He made 2 mistakes. The first was existing. Everyone instantly recognized him as the best friend of the guy who owned the Massillon Tigers last year and ran them into the ground bankrupt. He wasn't a popular fella here. His second mistake was just a bad idea. He tried to chat everyone up about the Massillon Tigers making a comeback, but this time it'll be different. We're going to be a traveling team without a home stadium. Just go play you guys. That wasn't uncommon for the time, but the men in the room were insulted by this proposition of disrespect to a storied team like Massillon, from a guy clearly just trying to make a buck off of them. If Massillon couldn't play anymore, no one was going to parade their corpse around. The guy was asked to leave before the meeting started. This is actually another important factor to note. The meeting did not start until 8:15 tonight, but everyone in attendance arrived hours before then. Important issues that they knew would come up, including that whole Massillon ordeal, were for the most part discussed and solved before the meeting officially started, so that when it did, they could breeze through and make everything official quickly. But interestingly, just before 8:15, a man named Art Ranney started jotting some notes down. He was here representing the Akron Professionals, formerly known as the Akron Indians, who were also loose members of that pre-1920 didn't really exist Ohio League. Art was a businessman, an intelligent guy. He had no reason to be taking notes, but he thought he should mark some things down to remember. He started scribbling on a piece of Akron professional football team stationery, and it is an awesome sign of the times for how small and broke these football teams were that they still had their own stationery. Very weirdly, Art Ranney included the Massillon Tigers as one of the present teams with a representative. It could have just been a mistake, an oversight, or he could have written it down before that guy got kicked out of the room and just forgot to erase it. Or maybe he knew. what was coming next. Finally, the meeting is called to order. Everything discussed is now on the record. First, the floor is opened up for any old business. For a league that did not exist yet, this is a shocking inclusion. Even more shocking, someone stood up. Ralph Hay, the gracious host of tonight's gasoline-aromaed gathering, raises his hand. He somehow got to the conclusion that he was the present representative for the Massillon Tigers. This is a crazy fact considering that it's not true, and remember, he actually owned a different team, the Canton Bulldogs. But no one stopped him. They weren't gonna let that guy they had kicked out of the meeting speak on behalf of the team. Someone had to. Ralph stood up and announced that the Massillon Tigers were withdrawing from professional football. Then he sat back down. Why would anyone stop him? It was a statement, not just from Ralph, but from every man in the room. Massillon is done, sad as it may be. The first recorded action that the soon-to-be National Football League ever took was to collectively kill a football team they all loved and respected because they knew it couldn't succeed. You could call it a cutthroat start. New business followed on the agenda. Let's make a name. APFA is weird, long, and unnatural. That's not a bad way to describe our sport. Let's do it. They needed guys in charge, a hierarchy of power. Host Ralph Hay was suggested to become president of this new league, but he was the one to speak up and say, "Guys, I'm decently well known in some parts of Ohio. That's about it. I'm looking at the most famous professional football player alive, leaning back on a Hutmobile, sipping a beer." It didn't take much more convincing. The league needed popularity, more eyes on it, and Jim Thorpe was the best way to do that. People recognized the name. Jim Thorpe was elected without campaigning as the league's first ever president. This would go on to work like a charm. Of the few, and it was few papers, that picked up the story of this new pro football league forming, most headlined it something like, "Jim Thorpe to do a new football thing," and I'm barely exaggerating. The desired effect was had. I don't know if this would have made its way to any papers if Thorpe's name wasn't attached. They gave him a vice president, a guy named Stanley Kofall of the Cleveland Tigers. Funny enough, a former player coach of the Massillon Tigers. Like I said, a lot of these guys had history on that team. And hey, Art? Yeah, Art. It looks like you're writing everything down over there. You want to be the secretary? Alright, well, your notes, yeah, those are the official minutes of the meeting now. Cool, thanks. Not much else of importance was touched on in the meeting. They made a few more basic decisions. Jim Thorpe appointed a committee to create bylaws for the league. We'll see how that turns out. They agreed not to even get into creating their own rules, and instead would just mirror the college football rulebook, and they would keep doing that for over a decade. And they made it a necessity that every team in the league puts the league name, APFA, on their stationery. These guys were crazy about stationery. Then, there's two more things. I'll read them word for word. Mr. Marshall of the Brunswick Dalk Colander Company Tire Division presented a silver loving cup to be given the team awarded the championship by the association. Any team winning the cup 3 times should be adjudged the owner. It was moved and seconded that a vote of thanks be extended by the secretary to Mr. Marshall. Okay, they took the trophy serious. See, in the previous Ohio League, there was no such marker for who was champion because there was really no league. This was a great way to identify yourself as a new, legitimate force. One owner would later say it gave everyone in the room a feeling that they were involved in a project that had dignity and stability. Neither of those words were close to true of the APFA, but you get the picture. A trophy makes you real, it makes you official. There are 275 words in the main body text of the league minutes from their first ever meeting. It ends after that, called and adjourned, everyone goes home, we read it all. 70 of those words, over 25% of them, were just about this trophy. And they are some packed words with a lot to note. We have no idea who the hell Mr. Marshall is, but we'll get to all that later. The meeting was adjourned. Everyone went home. Drive safe, guys. Don't get robbed, I guess. I don't know, in your Hutmobile. It was a Friday. It was September 17th. And just like that, for the good people of 1920, for the first time ever, football season was upon us. How about, for no particular reason, we laser focus in on one team? They are the paid athletes from Ohio, the ones who stationary, the Akron Professionals. It was only 16 days after that meeting, barely 2 weeks after the league formed, that play began for Akron. In fact, it was only 9 days after the meeting that some other teams in the league began playing games, even if the NFL will act like they didn't 100 years later. I'll talk about that eventually. The team was owned by the Akron Exhibition Company, and thus technically by their president, Charles Stahl, who had very little public footprint and hardly any known involvement with the team at all. He passed it down to the two guys who actually ran it, them being Art Ranney, the APFA's note-taking secretary, and Frank Neat, a local man who owned a few cigar stores that were popular hangouts for athletes and fans in town. The biggest piece of the roster coming in was Fritz Pollard. He was a hybrid quarterback running back who played for Akron last year in the Ohio League when the team was known as the Indians. Fritz had also starred in college football a few years ago at Brown University, and his alma mater wasn't the only Brown— Ooh, no, let's not do that. Most surprisingly for the time, Fritz Pollard was an African American, and thus every little thing he did in his career was both over-examined and revolutionary. At Brown, he had been the first black player ever named to Walter Camp's All-American list, and one of the earlier African Americans to live on campus at the school, period. He was the school's first ever colored athlete, and also broke the color barrier in the Rose Bowl in 1916, just the second time the game was ever played. It is really mind-blowing to think that Fritz Pollard was not only on a team in the first year of NFL history, like there was no segregation, but he was the team's star player. The fact that his teammates, his managers, the owner of the pros, that they were okay with it, willing to be just a guy on a team headlined by a black star, is really crazy. This is 1920. Over 50 years later, in 1971, colored people will still be banned from playing football at the universities of Georgia and Mississippi. 5 decades after Fritz was the premier player and crowd-drawing attraction of a pro team. The APFA, or NFL, wouldn't stay like this forever. This year, their first, the league had just 2 African-American players, Fritz and Bobby Marshall of the Rock Island Independents, who wasn't quite a star, more of a role player. Up to 1926, the league's first few years, a total of 9 colored people would play in the now renamed NFL. Then, in 1926, a bunch of teams folded, and those teams just so happened to have the only black talent in the league at the time. It's subject to debate, because when you look deeper, all the teams were indeed struggling financially and had legit reasons to fold, but it looks a little fishy that every team with a black player threw in the white towel. Wordplay. This instantly dropped the amount of colored talent in the NFL from 5 to 0. After that, for the next few years, guys would pop up sporadically for a couple games, but not often. I estimate there were between 5 and 10 African Americans who floated through the league in the next 6 years. Then, none. As of 1933, the NFL would move backwards and fully segregate. It wasn't made official as of league bylaws, they didn't write it down on Akron Pro Stationery, but the league came to a well-understood, not-so-gentlemanlike agreement. Don't sign colored players. This went on for 12 years. Disgustingly, owners like the Bears' George Halas and the Redskins' George Preston Marshall would deny that a color line existed. Their reason for the lack of diversity in the league was that the NFL must have not been appealing to African Americans and they didn't want to play here. It doesn't deserve analysis. In 1946, the Los Angeles Rams, fresh after moving out west from Cleveland, broke the agreement and the barrier and signed 2 colored players. This was done fully out of the caring and goodness in their heart, realizing what a horribly immoral mistake they had been making. That, or the fact that their publicly funded stadium in Los Angeles, well, the public would not let a segregated team play in it, and they needed a home field. Remember, kids, the NFL never got rid of racism, they simply sacrificed it to get to the West Coast. There is no better definition of manifest destiny. Now, Fritz Pollard wasn't the only dude on the team, but he was the best, and he was the most polarizing. Others will reveal themselves in time, I'm sure. The league, though now official, was still stumbling and bumbling. Everything was weird, not a lot of people showed up to the games. Sometimes the estimate would be in the hundreds, or possibly even more telling, we would just get, quote, a fair-sized crowd for the attendance number. The Rock Island Independents had an awesome 3-game attendance stretch of 7,000, then 4,000, then, quote, scared away several hundreds. There was no actual schedule created, every team was just responsible for finding another team to play when they could. This resulted in comical schedules, and many games being played and thrown together the week of, like a couple days before they were to be played. The Akron pros were actually pretty good at self-governing here, scheduling a consistent 1 game a week for most of the year, not missing Sundays or doubling up, until they lost the plot and needed some Thanksgiving football. But they didn't, use the Thursday Thanksgiving game as their week, they just threw it between 2 Sunday games, which were both against the same team, and that team was called the Triangles, so they played 3 times in 7 days. What is going on? But besides that, it's not far off a modern schedule, albeit shortened. You could see the silliness in a team like the Buffalo All-Americans. They played games on back-to-back days to close their season this year. The second of these was actually against the Akron pros, and we are going to get back to it, but not for a while. Set like a 38-minute timer. It is important to remember, there's no league schedule. It wasn't prepared pre-season. This is mostly fluid, just kind of being made up and put together as we go. So we don't actually know any of this yet, forget you heard it. Okay, let's see. What else? Because I know there's more weird out there. Well, there was no championship game. We got that big trophy from Brunswick Dalk or whatever, but we don't have a great way to give it to anyone. There's no playoff system, and the best record doesn't even determine anything. The league champion is to be voted on after the season by all the owners, and that is something that surely won't cause controversy. And also, I know that wasn't even included in the minutes from the league meeting. I don't know what to say there. I guess it was just another gentleman's agreement type thing. It is thought that before the season began, most of the owners had agreed that they would give it to the team with the best record, but again, I guess we'll just have to see if they stick to that. And then, just one more thing. You could play games against anyone. Like, anybody. You didn't have to play against other APFA teams. You could go set a game against 11 guys that you find at the bar and call them the Jeffersons, and it would count on your schedule. I'm kidding, of course. The Jeffersons were a real team in the APFA. Chaos is winning by so many points right now. Even the Akron pros abused this one a little. Their first game of the season was against... oh my god. I'm sorry. The Wheeling Stogies. Okay, give me a sec. So much more is coming there. A couple weeks later, Akron would play the also non-league Cincinnati Celts. These are free, easy bumps in your record that you can go get whenever you want. Though, to be fair, the Cincinnati Celts must have been decent because they actually joined the APFA next year in 1921, but sucked and left in 1922. And honestly, joining the APFA didn't mean anything, so I take it back. My favorite example of this non-league scheduling is one of my favorite teams ever, the one I just joked about, the Rochester Jeffersons. They played 11 games on the season. They played against one single APFA team. Week 5, they lost to the Buffalo All-Americans, and that was it. Every other game was against a non-league team. Some of them are just like the Utica Knights of Columbus. Who is all Buffalo? I'm guessing not the whole city. Fort Porter? Yeah. No, that one is indeed the military. An army hospital, actually. Yet these games all counted towards their official record. The APFA had no separation of league versus non-league. No rules about it. This was all free game. You could find a bad team, beat them over and over every week, play nobody else, no one in the APFA, and win the APFA championship. Which this also means, yeah, the Fort Porter military base, they exist in NFL history, technically, and as victims to the worst regular season shutout loss of all time. It was 66-0. We expect more from the men serving our country, but what are you gonna do? It's the Jeffersons. They also went on to later play the same team, the Rochester Scalpers, 3 times in 3 weeks to close the season, so they really did try that strategy. But of course, they slowly got worse and worse results each game until the 2 had a scoreless tie. And the Jeffersons, by the way, still weren't even good with this scheduling strategy. They went 6-3-2. They lost to multiple of these non-league, barely semi-pro teams, and some sports writers didn't even include them when talking about the APFA. And that, I feel, is plenty enough baseline to get into our season. Sometimes I find myself trophy hunting. I exert, a lot of energy, looking to locate loose leftover hunks of metal. At that point, no matter where I am, I fall asleep. But it feels like I'm floating on a fluffy fabric full of feathers, because I'm wearing a sleep mask from Manta Sleep. This video is sponsored by Manta Sleep. Have you ever experienced darkness? Not this dark. I'm talking pitch black, 100%. Light cries when it tries to enter levels of dark. Slip on a Manta Sleep mask, and any time of the day, any place you could be, you can take an easy nap in the nice quiet darkness. That's not the only thing this mask has to offer. My favorite aspect of it would have to be the eye cups. This is the biggest separator from any other sleep mask I've used or seen. Manta's eye cups comfortably grip around your nose and softly press your eyes. It allows for you to roll around when you sleep as much as you want. This is the sleep mask for you. Get it at Manta Sleep, and hey, maybe use code HAYDEN, HYDN, for a nice 10% discount at the link below this video. Week 1 is the only time of the year where every football team has hope. Hope is a great tool to have, and dangerous to lose. For the Akron Pros, Week 1 was, of course, a matchup with the ever-so-dangerous, cancer-in-a-car-giving Wheeling Stogies. Really embrace the name, because I have terrible news for you. The team's name was not the Wheeling Stogies. I know, it's horrible. It's unholy, is what it is. See, there is a place called Wheeling, and they had a football team in 1920. There's actually multiple places called Wheeling, but I can confirm this was the West Virginia town. Tragically, I can say with about 99% confidence, their name was not the Stogies. The cool guy word for cigar appears a total of 0 times in any newspaper I can find with the team. In reality, they were the Wheeling Tigers, which newspapers did refer to them as, including in the recaps for this very game against Akron. Oh yeah, by the way, Akron dominated, 43-0. They start the year 1-0. I guess it serves as its own time capsule. Today the NFL is uber popular, its early history has been examined hundreds of times over, and still, every credible account of the 1920 Akron Pros, a charter member of the NFL, gets their first opponent, one of the first games in league history, incorrect. But I see exactly how the mix-up happened. There was a team called the Wheeling Stogies. The big issue, they did not play football. The Wheeling Stogies, also out of Wheeling, West Virginia, were a minor league baseball team. They started playing in the 1800s. They bounced all around a ton of different minor leagues through their time, but were recorded playing until the year 1934. Thus, I think the story is pretty clear. A decently well-known minor league baseball team somehow got confused over the years for the random pro football team running around the same city. It was picked up in something and everyone just kept running with it, didn't question who they were. It's pretty wild to me because everywhere online, Wikipedia, Pro Football Reference, StatMuse, they all list a football team that wasn't a football team as the Akron Pros' first opponent. How about the game itself? Akron did win it easily, and we actually got a beautifully long write-up, quarter by quarter, going through a 1920 NFL game. It's a fun read that I'll link down below. Here's what it felt like to be in taking sports news in the year. But the spark notes: Akron got a safety in the first 60 seconds of play, and they didn't slow down from there. It was 29-0 by halftime. The forward pass was used rarely but effectively for both teams. It was pretty much the only way Wheeling could move the ball on offense. The MVP honors of the game would have been a toss-up between Fritz Pollard, who did his normal thing of running all over the Tigers all day, and Al Nesser, who we might as well add to our player collection now. If I had to pin down a modern-day position for Big Al, based on what I've read through this season, I'd call him a pulling guard/wide receiver on offense, and that is every bit as odd as it sounds. On the other side of the ball, it wasn't as confusing. The man lived and breathed defensive line. At this point in football, substitutions were limited. You couldn't just bring guys on and off the field when you wanted. There were only a few points during the game that a sub could be made. They mostly weren't made. This is what gave birth to the term 60-minute men, a way to describe the brutality and physicality that a pro football player put up with for all 4 quarters without ever touching the sideline. It is, unironically, the way the game was meant to be played. By 1950, the term 60-minute man was out of the game, as were any players that would play every single snap. Sad. Al Nesser, however, is really known for one thing, and it's nothing we just talked about. You've likely heard of the Manning family, the most famous in pro football. Father, Archie, great quarterback in his own right. His 2 Super Bowl winning sons, also quarterbacks. A grandson, currently playing QB at Texas, looks to add to the legacy. But the most famous family doesn't mean the biggest. Allow me to introduce you to the Nesser clan. 7 brothers. Each of them will play professional football. 6 of them will play on the same team at the same time next season for the 1921 Columbus Panhandles. AKA a solid 30%-ish of an NFL team were brothers. That includes Big Al, who will jump over there from Akron after this year. I'll be honest, I got carried away talking about the Nesser brothers. I cut out a lot of script right here because I came to the rightful conclusion that they deserve their own video. Look out for that. But yeah, the Nesser brothers. None of them went to college. The papers seem to love pointing that out every time they succeeded against people who were university educated. Poor Big Al is here all by himself this year. No family to keep him company, but he was the best player of the brothers in terms of career stats. He's also weirdly often misidentified as the last NFL player to not wear a helmet, but that is definitely not true because guys were still going headless horsemen like a decade after his retirement. But he was an Akron professional. He got to play football with his brothers, and he had a killer Week 1 game to open the league's first ever season against a team that's been entirely misidentified to history. The early NFL was a pretty fun place. The next week, we got our first real APFA competition. Fittingly, a matchup against the Columbus Panhandles. Al Nesser gets to line up against a few of his brothers. From what I can tell, there were 3 total Nessers on this year's Panhandles team, though only 1 played in the game against Akron. So today, we really learned that an Al is greater than either a Frank, a Phil, or a Ted. I don't know which. Akron cruised by Columbus almost as easily as they did last week, 37-0. One guy, Bob Nash, recovered a fumble, kept running and scored a touchdown, registering the first ever scoop and score in league history. This record, however, is subject to controversy because the Rock Island Independents did record a scoop and score against a non-league team. And under that same umbrella, the NFL records a safety that Akron got today as the first in league history, even though, as we know, they got one in the first minute of their first game against the non-league Wheeling Tigers. The issue here is that the NFL doesn't like counting these non-league games today. They pretend that only APFA versus APFA matchups count, but that is quite literally revisionist history. These games did count. They counted the same amount as games against APFA teams. No distinction between league and non-league was made until the next season, 1921, the second year of NFL history. Then they would make two separate categories, but not this year. So the NFL is incorrect, and they are wrongly trying to block teams like the Wheeling Tigers, and Fort Porter Military Base out of their history. Anyways, this was another home game. Akron played at League Park, which was a baseball stadium first. In fact, I can't find any pictures of it ready for football use, just this one of a baseball game. It goes to speak to the drastic popularity differences between football and baseball at the time. League Park didn't even have a full-time baseball team playing there, but the city still kept a ball field just to have maybe a team will come along, rather than turning it into a football stadium for the team they already did have. All of Akron's home games, which included the first 4 weeks of the season, were played at League Park, and that was actually better than what a lot of teams had. Some APFA squads were like sharing stadiums with local high school football teams, and by sharing, I absolutely mean it was the high school stadium and they got permission to play there. We jumped back to non-league games week 3. Don't worry, the Akron Pros didn't abuse the lack of scheduling oversight. This was the last game they'd play against a non-APFA squad, and it was actually their closest so far. The Cincinnati Celts put up a good fight, and as we touched on, we know this team actually existed. They got the name of the opponent correct. 1920 bonus points all around. Fritz Pollard had to absolutely strap the guys on his back and carry them today, trouncing through defenders and racial stigmas on the way. The newspapers covering him are so interesting because they are truly impressed with his ability, but they also cannot physically mention his name without including something about his skin color next to it. For the first time this season, a little strategy was actually required from Akron to pull out the win, even if that strategy was give the ball to Fritz and get out of the way. That seems as good a time as any to introduce ourselves to our head coach. Kinda. Sideline coaching wasn't actually allowed in the APFA. You couldn't have a guy down there just to call plays or manage things, lead men. This season for the Akron Pros, it was LG Tobin, the former Penn State man, a blocking back with a good head on his shoulders, and, well, that was about all the requirements for the job. He knew who his best player was, and he normally had the ball snapped directly to Fritz Pollard, who could then make things happen. Interestingly, and this is where the Fritz quarterback-running back debate pops up, he would not normally throw passes. The quarterback position, one guy taking the snap every single play, was not super existent. Fritz took a direct snap on probably 70 to 80% of plays from what I can gather. He was the guy the ball went through on offense, but on the less common occasions where a forward pass was mixed in, well, meet Rip King, another member of the squad. He was always going to be the guy tossing long balls. Rip King threw pretty much every recorded pass on the season, including a few touchdowns. He was a first-team All-Pro this year alongside Fritz Pollard, and he's also a well-before-his-time case of football tragedy. 30 years after this inaugural season that kicked off the league, where most guys hit each other savagely, without helmets, a cloth-thin layer of body protection, if anything, Rip King scribbled a note that had the words, "My only love," and tragic ending on it. He lost his hope. He put a gun to his head. He was 54 years old. In a disturbing twist of fate, it was 54 years after his death that the first deceased NFL player was diagnosed with CTE. A 7-0 win over the Cleveland Tigers needs just one man to describe it with. Bob Nash, the guy who debatably registered the first ever scoop and score a couple weeks ago. Yeah, he was our hero today. Born in Ireland, you could make the argument through our past league versus non-league controversies that he was the first ever NFL player born outside of America. He had previously played on the now extinct Massillon Tigers. Today, with Tigers from a different place pinned on their own 8-yard line, Bob Nash blocked a punt, picked it up, and scored the only points of the football game. You can, again, argue it is the first blocked punt in NFL history. Hilariously, the punt was kicked by the vice president of the APFA, Stanley Kofal, who was the player coach of the Cleveland Tigers. One might go as far as to infer Bob Nash ran over Stanley Kofal. One could use the verb flattened rather than ran over. One could thus describe him as Flat Stanley. Right after the Tigers and pros played each other, maybe during the game itself, some interesting chatter started going down between the two. Namely, they were beginning to realize the existence of trades. It was such a novel concept, this paper, published the day after the game, wrote, quote, "Now they're beginning to talk trades of players in pro football, just like they do in baseball," end quote. The idea was in its infancy, but the Akron pros were some of the first to peek out the window and see what was possible. It was noted that Akron was interested in a guy named Tuffy Khan from the Cleveland Tigers, a World War I veteran and an Oregon alum. So someone, likely Art Ranney or Frank Need, the guys running the team, clearly liked what they saw from Tuffy in this game and wanted to flip him onto their side. They likely started discussing this just a couple hours after, or maybe during the game on Sunday, for it to be included in Monday's paper. The trade didn't happen today or this week, obviously. Tuffy was one of the best players on the Cleveland Tigers, but the Akron pros could hope. They could hope that somehow Tuffy would come their way. Who are we to stop them from hoping? We don't know who the next opponent is, not yet, and remember that's intentional. We might have, it's tough to pin down exactly when games were scheduled, but we probably didn't know. However, if any game this season were to have been agreed on well ahead of time, it would have been this one. For their first away matchup of the year, sitting at 4-0, the Akron Pros take on the also undefeated Canton Bulldogs, who do have one tie, but also one Jim Thorpe on their team. They were the dynasty of the previous Ohio League, defending national champions right now. Even though it was the first APFA season, everyone agreed they were the team to beat. Pretty much every time someone played against Canton, some paper would pick it up as the battle to determine the world championship. That's not too funny right now, but it'll just get funnier as the video goes. They were undefeated in 1919, didn't play in 1918 because of the war, and had only one loss in 1917. It was a good team. In the game, Bob Nash was back doing things. He was respected around the league for his toughness, his grit, and that showed most clearly in having the respect of Jim Thorpe. According to Thorpe, on a punt return during this game, he asked one of his teammates not to block Bob Nash, let him through, because Jim wanted to hit the guy. It's the ultimate stamp of approval. Jim's teammates obliged. Nasty Bob Nash rushed in with a red in his eyes. Jim Thorpe did the same. The crash was head-on and intense, more akin to planes colliding than cars. Both players were knocked unconscious and carried off the field. Not carted, carried. They both returned to the game. It finished. Akron, winning this ballgame 10-0, was by far their biggest win of the season to date. You could call it a statement win. This was a full, put-together group of guys. Fritz Pollard kept leading the way, but he was contained well today by Canton. Clearly, over the course of the season, it was the defense, the unit that had not allowed a point, that was really impressive. It is important to note the far lower scoring averages in pro football at the time, but to cross Jim Thorpe's Bulldogs off the schedule, who most assumed to be the best in the league, and still have a clean sheet on defense, it was an impressive effort. This team, with this win, was currently the most dominant in the APFA. They had guys pitching in from all over, and each of them was something we really can't wrap our heads around today. They were professional football players, but mostly they were still people. Nothing close to famous football stars. There was Fred Sweetland, solid contributor. He was actually the player that Akron was shopping around in that trade attempt for Tuffy Khan earlier, but he would end up staying the whole season. 2 years after helping this dominant team, he was taking out ads in the local paper looking for a high school baseball coaching job. Life comes at you fast in the APFA. Frank Moran was an offensive lineman on the team, including taking snaps or giving snaps at center. He's known for just about everything he did in life except be on this team. It was his only year in professional football. He had previously been a famous professional boxer who fought twice for the heavyweight championship of the world. After his excursion of playing in the APFA, he became a movie star and was in over 100 films. Cool guy. Have you heard of Pike Johnson? He was on what is often considered to be the greatest high school football team ever. In 1914, him and his buddies at Everett High School won a national championship, went 13-0 on the year, and outscored opponents 600-0. That's an average score of 46-0 a game. Then, Pike had to play. He too, like seemingly everyone else and their mother that was involved with this thing, suited up for the now extinct Massillon Tigers. Then Pike had to fight. World War I veteran with a Purple Heart in his closet. Pike came back to play, a solid piece on the Akron Pros. He lived until 1985, almost caught 3 centuries. Scotty Bierce didn't play much, but that's okay. He's gonna get rich and be a big shot lawyer in like 6 years. Bill Preston barely played at all. He's a member of the awesome One and Done Club, and that's not seasons. Bill played 1 game. It was the opener earlier in the year against Wheeling. He was subbed in midway through at tackle, finished the game, and then left the team for undisclosed reasons. Those reasons were never disclosed, and it was 1920. I tried, I couldn't find them. But he was also a former World War Navy man and a future insurance salesman, so he's cool. Al Pirati, oh god. Actually, we'll skip Al. He's confusing. Do not remember the name Al Pirati. We're done talking about Al Pirati. We had a game scheduled next week. I swear we did, but it's raining. No more game. Week 6 against the Detroit Heralds canceled for weather. A good thing, considering much of the team came down with an illness this week and would not have been able to play. Maybe too good of a thing. I wouldn't be surprised if Akron used the rain as an excuse to rest up for the week and not play shorthanded. The next week, perfection met blemish. In a rematch against the Cleveland Tigers, this time in Cleveland, a hard-fought slugging fest resulted in nothing more than a 7-7 tie. Still undefeated, the Akron Pros were no longer perfect. Their defense finally had bent. The Cleveland Tigers score the first points on them. They do it through a forward pass. The pass was caught by Tuffy Khan. The very man who Akron had tried to acquire weeks ago after these teams first played was the one to finally break them. Akron knew he was trouble. It's an interesting fact. 6 points were on the board. The extra point was kicked. It was good. That makes 7. The extra point was kicked by Al Pirati. Yes, Al Pirati should have been playing for the Akron Professionals. What is going on here? It will not be easy to explain. Follow along with me. This is Al Pirati. He went to Everett High School. He was there in 1914 with Pike Johnson, longtime buds. He was a year older than Pike, so he graduated in 1914 and thus missed out on the perfect football team. But he did play baseball and threw a no-hitter in 1914, the spring of his senior year. Then he enrolled in college at Washington and Lee. He played football, and the next year, his buddy Pike Johnson also enrolled at Washington and Lee. They got to play together. 2 close, maybe best friends, got to play professionally on the Akron Pros together. Cool. Now again, Al enrolled in 1914. He graduated in 1923. He took a hefty break. Al Puretti, quote-unquote, made 5 attempts to enter the service and was turned down each time. Rough. Can't fight in the military? Poor guy, you might as well be a pro athlete. That wasn't ironic at the time. He started pitching in the minor leagues. He slowly worked his way up and did become an MLB pitcher, tossing the ball in 6 games for the Boston Braves through their 1920 season. He picked up a single career win on September 27th, 1920. That was 10 days after the APFA was formed at the meeting in a Hupmobile dealership. It was mere days before the Akron Pros' first game of the season. In fact, Al didn't play the first game of the season because that very same day, Al Puretti was pitching in another MLB game. This one was his last of the baseball season, and he then joined the Akron Pros full-time after that. Impressive athletic year for the guy, but stay with me. We can confirm Big Al played against the Columbus Panhandles, Akron's second game of the year, on October 10th. He subbed into the game midway through at center for Russ Bailey. This is the first and last game he would ever play for the Akron Pros. Al Puretti's name disappears for a couple weeks. He does not start and is not subbed in to any NFL games. His name appears nowhere that I can find in any football news or reports. The MLB regular season had ended, the World Series was going on, and his team wasn't in it, so he wasn't there either. 3 weeks later, on October 31st, Halloween, he suddenly appears, out of nowhere, starting for the Cleveland Tigers at center. No explanation is given. He even kicks an extra point for them as they defeat the Columbus Panhandles 7-0. They were his opponent in each of his last 2 games. Now, we don't know how Al Puretti got from the Akron Pros to the Cleveland Tigers. This game that he appears in comes just 1 week after the 2 teams played each other for the first time when Akron won 7-0. But sometime in this period where Al didn't play a few weeks, he changed teams, somehow. I find it likely that a trade could have happened at that first Cleveland-Akron game, though again there's no evidence of anything at all. We don't actually have a clue what happened. We'll find out later why I think this is a good theory. It very well could have been the first trade in NFL history, but it was so underreported, so not a big deal, that it flew under the radar and no one caught it. The other possibility is that Al Puretti was just offered more money by the Cleveland Tigers at any point during the 3 weeks where he went AWOL, and so he took the more money and started playing for them, just ditched Akron. You remember, things like that, I mean that exact sentence was a specific reason listed at the meeting in the Hupmobile dealership, were exactly why the APFA was created, to get a league that can stop this. But right now, in the first year of things, the bylaws were kinda still being drafted. They might not exist. There wasn't a ton of strict on paper rules. I mean, we read through the entire minutes of the league meeting. That was it. I showed it all to you. There was zero oversight or league authority, and there was no precedent. It was kinda a gentleman's agreement. Remember everyone just chatting before the meeting that teams weren't gonna poach players mid-season by offering more money. We promise. Not everyone followed through on that. We know for a fact that it still happened this year a lot. There are documented examples of players doing that we'll get to. But yeah, we don't know for sure what happened with Big Al. I'm pretty confident it was one of those 2 things. I just can't find anything to point us in the direction of which. I sort of blabbed on there about Al Puretti, but it wasn't without purpose. I do think everything I just said will become more relevant and important here soon. Akron moves on hastily from the tie game. They got scored on. Yeah, the opposing points came from a guy they tried to trade for and a guy they had on their team a month ago, but they still got scored on. What about the offensive side of the ball? I mean, what happened there? How'd we get stumped to 7 points? Well, someone on Cleveland's defense had all of the Akron Pros' signals and was calling out their plays before they were run. Someone was also known as Al Puretti, and only by those measures was the offense stumped and the defense finally penetrated. 4 days later, the Akron Pros would make what I truly consider to be one of the funniest moves in the history of professional sports. Tuffy Khan, the player who they tried and failed to trade for, then scored the first touchdown of the year on him, I swear this is true, signs with the Akron Pros. It is not a trade. He just walks over and signs for more money. The APFA does not do its job as a league. Akron gets the guy they always wanted. A little hope takes them a long ways. The only two people to have scored points on the Akron Professionals so far this season also played for the Akron Professionals this season. Oh boy, this was a football team. The Dayton Triangles came to town next week. They may only have 3 points, but they scored none and lost by 13 of them. Akron scored both their touchdowns in the fourth quarter after the game went through 3 way closer than it should have. Both teams did come in undefeated. Akron with the 1 tie, Dayton had 2 of them. But since Akron had beaten the Dynasty Canton Bulldogs and the Triangles had tied with them earlier in the year, this game was billed, at least in Akron and Dayton, as the game for the pro title. Don't worry, they kept putting the same label on all of the Canton Bulldogs games regardless of opponent. Why wouldn't you bill your matches a championship tilt? It only makes it seem more exciting, and it's not like the APFA is gonna do anything to punish you or call you out. The league does nothing. Only 4 days passed after that. Then, the Canton Bulldogs tried again. Jim Thorpe came to Akron this time around on Thanksgiving Day. Football on Turkey Day actually predates the APFA even. It's a true staple. In fact, this was just one of 6 games today. They were already leaning into it. Most of the league was active, and it's the reason for this weird kink in the schedule. And thus, unsurprisingly, with Thanksgiving Thorpe, this game drew the biggest crowd they got for any home matchup this season, though it was still low compared to what they could pull on the road in other places. The city of Akron weren't the best supporters in the APFA, and League Park only had a capacity of 5,000 people. Knowing that, it makes the fact they squeezed 6,500 in today almost more impressive. Then again, it's a newspaper estimate. But they still beat Canton, another close ballgame behind the day's only score, a touchdown pass from Rip King to Bob Nash. 2 names we know take us to 2-0 against the defending champions this year. We're looking good. Just 3 days later, the pros had to complete their hardest bit of schedule for the season, suiting up for their 3rd game in 7 days. It was a quick rematch with the ones they call Triangle. Things were taken care of, slowly again, behind 2 second-half Fritz Pollard touchdowns, one a 32-yard toss from Rip King. An undefeated record, 8-0-1, 2 wins over Canton, a pretty reasonable claim to the professional football title. But it's not over, and it's not going to be easy. We have to go in and defend ourselves. Let's take a look at the top of the APFA standings to this point. Trailing closely behind the Akron Pros are the Decatur Staleys and Buffalo All-Americans. It's worth noting that in 1920, ties were virtually ignored in league standings. Rather than treating them as half a win, the league literally treated them like nothing, like the game didn't happen. Thus, the Staleys, with 1 more tie but 1 more win, were ranked ahead of Buffalo. Regardless, it was the Buffalo All-Americans, 8-1 on the season, who were our final opponents. I would personally call their schedule a little weak. They've beat 5 non-leaguers and only battled 4 teams in the APFA, going 3-1 against them. Not only did they take on the legendary All-Buffalo team, they also blew out the unprecedented West Buffalo squad. Good job, guys. They lost to a Canton Bulldogs team that we've beaten twice. What the hell was that? Oh, yeah, we set a timer. Okay, well, we made it back. As we touched on way earlier, the All-Americans had a weird quirk in their schedule. To close it out, Buffalo had football games on back-to-back days. 24 hours before they were battling us, they were going to be at the Polo Grounds in New York for what will probably be the biggest crowd of any APFA game all year when they get a chance for revenge on Jim Thorpe's Canton Bulldogs. For as weird, dumb, and crazy as the league was, playing football games on back-to-back days was not very common, even for them. Before that ball game is played, though, I think we touch back on the great group of guys we've got one more time, and I think we appreciate our leader, Fritz Pollard. This is one of the least offensive headlines I could track down on the man. Still, they refer to him as the little colored grid star, which, this being the one I share, can give you an idea on the type of stuff I read through, and horrifically I think they scrubbed the very worst of it off the newspaper archive pages. We can't even see that. He's spoken of in this long article, though, with admiration. It feels surprising to be reading stuff like this from the year 1920, but it actually attempts to dive into some of the obvious racism that Fritz has been victim to this year, talking about opposing players who always speak of getting him. How in pile-ups, guys will be diving onto his legs seconds after the whistle, trying to twist his body the wrong way, and refs close their eyes. He was only 5'9", 160 pounds. He literally had to develop a habit of falling on his back every time he was tackled, then sticking his cleats in the air to dissuade players from jumping on him. This same article also showed how his teammates, at least some of them, have stood by his side. An incident that we can infer is a common one was described at a restaurant with a few teammates, including Bob Nash. The waiter goes around the table and takes everyone's order except Fritz's, skipping right over him and walking back to the kitchen. Two of his teammates, one Bob Nash, then quote-unquote grabbed the waiter and proceeded to artistically maul him until he consented to wait on Pollard. Still quoting, and believe us, Fritz got some service after that. Hell yeah. Another incident describes two white bellboys at a hotel seeing and then promptly arguing with Fritz Pollard about his being there. A few unnamed teammates approached the situation. They both instantly made a bet with the bellboys, for 25 cents, that the guy they were currently arguing with was one of their idols, and they didn't even know it. After a brief explanation and display of proof, the football players were paid. Years in the future, Fritz himself would also commend the two men who ran the Akron Pros, Art Ranney and Frank Need, for their ahead-of-the-time views. Now, according to Fritz, when he was in the league, there was already discussion about a potential color barrier. However, it was always shut down by either Need, Ranney, or another man he gives credit to, Doc Young of the Hammond Pros. These men could not fathom why the issue of a football player's skill could not be discussed without bringing up their skin color. Unsurprisingly, when the color barrier was implemented in 1933, none of these three men had any involvement in the league anymore. Beyond this, Fritz says that Frank Need used to actually let him get dressed for home games in one of his cigar shops because, of course, bathrooms and locker rooms were completely segregated by color, and he feared for his star player's safety. Need would then drive Fritz to the stadium for the game, and this is smack dab in the times of separate but not really equal. Need pretty much told everyone on his Akron Pros something that stuck with Fritz well enough for him to remember it decades later. To paraphrase, "Gentlemen, you can accept and welcome Mr. Fritz Pollard, or you can get the hell off of this football team." Well, Buffalo had their revenge game. In front of 10,000 people at the Polo Grounds, they avenged their loss, defeating the Canton Bulldogs. Big deal. The stage was set. Buffalo is now 9-1. The Akron Pros are 8-0-1. There's no championship game in the APFA, but this is, in effect, a championship game in the APFA. Remember, the best record does not instantly give you the title, but likely will win you the vote that does. The field is pounced with rain, hail, and borderline snow throughout. The weather is so horrid, hardly anyone shows up to the game. A day after playing in front of 10,000 for revenge, only 3,000 show up to watch Buffalo and Akron play for glory. They don't get much to see. The game ends in a 0-0 tie. For the Akron Professionals, that might as well be a win. Hell, that might as well be a trophy. The season is over. Something else did happen in the game that is so beyond weird. Bob Nash, a great player for Akron who we've touched on a lot, was traded in the middle of the game to the opposing team. At least he might have been. This claim has been made by the PFRA, the Professional Football Researchers Association. They are generally pretty credible, although I have found mistakes in my lots of time researching, which is normal. I put mistakes in these videos too. No source is perfect. But the thing is, I can find no proof or evidence or mention of this trade, swap, any time near when it happened. It doesn't show up in recorded text till like decades and decades later when the PFRA starts talking about it, so take it with a grain of salt. Because here's the big thing. This is referred to as the first trade or player swap deal in NFL history. It's the accepted answer to that trivia question. And here's our connection. There's a real chance that Al Pirati was actually the first trade in NFL history. I mean, we know Akron was shopping around for trades a while ago, tried to get Tuffy Khan, and eventually were able to, but just through a signing, not a trade. They could have shipped off Big Al to Cleveland in a trade weeks ago, but it just didn't make the news, and we'll never be able to confirm the first ever NFL trade. Both of these potential deals have the same amount of evidence. None. So, I don't know. I'll throw all that information at you and let you decide. This Akron-Buffalo game might have had a mid-game trade, and it may have been the first trade in NFL history, or it may not have, and they may not have. Isn't this fun? The PFRA notes that the trade literally happened mid-game, like while the owners were sitting on the sideline watching it, and they note a possible reason or motive being the really small, disappointing attendance number. It just doesn't sound right. But a mark in its favor is that nothing sounds right in the APFA. It is worth noting, because the first thing that jumped to my mind is how awesome it would be if he played for both teams in the same game, like switched jerseys at halftime. But Bob Nash, sadly, did not play at all for either side in this game, and this was the last game for Buffalo this year, so he didn't suit up for them in any games until next season. That's another reason that the PFRA claim of it happening mid-game is fishy to me, because he could have way more realistically just joined Buffalo at any point in the offseason, and there's no evidence to the contrary. But who cares? We won, or tied, but just as good. Akron should be the 1920 APFA champions, with the only undefeated season in the league. You wish. I'm about to sound like a Packers fan, and I'm not, but George Halas, not technically the founder, but the godfather of the Decatur Staleys, who exist today as the Chicago Bears, well, he was a whiny racist. I say racist because Fritz Pollard, who I now cherish and adore, singled out Halas as not only the greatest enemy of the black football player, but the lead man in getting the league to eventually be fully segregated for over a decade. And I say whiny, well, for a lot of reasons. The man was a pioneer of football. I don't want to take away from that. I'm not trying to cancel the dude. I've painted him in much better lights in previous videos, but there was a real dark side. The Decatur Staleys season was over, as was, of course, the Akron Pros. Both ended on December 5th. They each played their last game. Most of the league did the same. This Sunday was the last day of the 1920 season, in which there were multiple APFA games. But George Halas was mad. His squad was good at 10 wins, 1 loss, and 1 tie. They were the second place team in the league, above Buffalo only because they played one more game. George didn't feel it was fair that the Akron Pros were going to be named champions without ever having played against his team, who he thought was superior. What pissed him off even more, and legitimately so a little bit, was that Akron also hadn't played the team his Staleys lost to, the Chicago Cardinals, or the team he tied with, the Rock Island Independents. Thus, he challenged the Akron Pros to one final game, for whatever reason, call it pride, Akron accepted. They could have declined. They had a more than respectable enough resume, and they almost certainly would have been named champions. No sweat. Akron chose to battle on the road and put it all on the line. The game, as so many have this year, was billed as the APFA Championship matchup, the only one which historically would be the proper game to bear that title.
It brought 12,000 fans to a baseball stadium that in a few years will change its name to Wrigley Field,
now known as Cubs Park, which had been set up for the gridiron spectacle. For the second week in a row, the Akron Pros rode that defense to a 0-0 championship clinching tie ball game. 8-0-3 on the year for an undefeated season. George Halas can try to pull whatever slick last-minute moves he wants. The Akron Pros have the best record in the APFA. They are, for real, going to be the champions. I hope. We just have to do that vote thing with the owners. Oh god, the vote isn't till next year. We have to wait weeks into the offseason until the league's annual meeting in January to make it official. I vote we fast forward through that time.
Welcome back to Sports Center, folks. Well, the first APFA season has wrapped up on us. Lay it on me, partner. How'd you like it?
Well, Jim the Kid, I haven't heard anything called the APFA until about 6 seconds ago when you just said it. Sounds like a hoot.
Yeah, that is the reaction I've mostly been getting. But that it was quite a hoot, my friend. Quite a hoot. We have a three-way controversy for that World Championship title, but it does seem likely that the Akron Pros, undefeated by the way, will be the ones to take it. Let's take a closer look at the team using our special time travel stats.
First of all, this defense was beyond special. They allowed 7 points on the season. For one of the most bewildering facts of all time, the only two players to score on them all year, the only two to register points on the NFL's first champions, also spent time on their roster, and no defense has ever allowed less than 7 points, as of 2025 at least. That's as far as time travel stats go. It'll never happen again. They outscored opponents 151-7 on the season, in the Super Bowl era, and I know you guys don't know what the Super Bowl is yet, just give football a few decades, it's gonna get awesome. The least points per game ever allowed was 9.2 by the 1977 Atlanta Falcons. The Akron Professionals allowed less than 9.2 total, just all together, combined. It's one of just a couple perfect seasons in NFL history, which comes with some controversy. Let me be honest, I was a little rough on George Halas, because he deserves it, but I do need to be clear that in addition to the Staleys trying to claim they were champions, the Buffalo All-Americans were doing the same thing. Over the course of the long time off, both victims of the scoreless tie were campaigning for themselves, because Akron didn't beat them. How could they be better? Of course, when I say campaigning, it was still the 1920 APFA. No one really was listening or cared, but they were complaining, and it made some papers and was recorded. However, in the year 2025, people will listen a lot closer to Buffalo's case in particular. See, in 1920, the APFA officially did not count ties in its standings. A tie was basically equal to no game being played when talking about your winning percentage. Thus, the Akron Pros technically had a perfect winning percentage and were the only team with such. It wasn't until 1972, however, way down the line, that the NFL would change this rule, instead counting ties as half a win, half a loss, which is still how it happens in modern times. With these rules taken into account, Akron's winning percentage drops to 86.36%. The Buffalo All-Americans' adjusted percentage is the exact same. Their case for that reason is stronger, but at the time, no, I still don't think it held the same weight, and honestly, to me, I don't need to look at winning percentage. Akron tied with both teams. Buffalo and Decatur didn't play each other, but one of you three didn't lose any games, while the other two did. I think it's pretty obvious that Akron was the champions, and any argument otherwise is a little grasping at straws. So back to this chart of perfect teams, everyone but one has an asterisk with this tie rule, depending on if you count them as half a win or as nothing. Thus, the only truly perfect team by modern day standards, undefeated and untied, is the 1972 Miami Dolphins. The only other thing I want to mention is the coaching situation. As we touched on, LG Tobin is credited officially as the coach of this year's team. The next season, it's recorded that he was the co-head coach, alongside Fritz Pollard, the star who took a little step up. These 2 seasons are all that LG Tobin coached, and counting them under the rules that existed when he coached, he has a winning percentage of 84.2. That is the best winning percentage of any coach in NFL history with a minimum of 20 games coached. Even if you tweak the whole list for modern rules, he's still first. Though you often see this stat with a minimum 50 or 100 games coached, and that's just to cut out LG. He's the only one in that weird gray area territory. There is some controversy here too. See, the next year, when Fritz Pollard became co-head coach alongside him, it made Fritz the first ever African-American coach in the league's history. A cool achievement, and it's crazy it happened this early, but it's even crazier that it didn't happen again until 1989. However, Fritz would later go on to contest official records, saying that he coached the team the whole time he was on it, and another team he would jump to later in his career, but wasn't credited. According to him, and seemingly this article, even some of the guys okay with being his teammate and him being the star drew the line at being coached by a colored man, and he was thus not given the official title. Kinda a similar thing with the quarterback position, though both are definitely debatable and not really known for sure. Anyways, that is the Akron Pros of 1920, your soon-to-be first ever APFA champions. Referencing the long period with no champion and no football, the Pro Football Researchers Association had this to say. Through the winter of 1920-21, the APFA couldn't even say for certain which team had won its championship. On the other hand, there wasn't a whole hell of a lot of people who cared. How much prestige the title was worth was highly debatable. We were originally supposed to meet in January, though that didn't happen, and it got pushed way back to here, April. Sadly, tragically, painfully, there is no available transcript of the minutes from this meeting. We do have summaries via newspapers of the time. We likely started with old business. Well, on the record, at least, we can infer, similar to last year, issues were actually discussed and planned out prior to the meeting. There was also a pretty glaring omission that was obvious to everyone before things got official. The president wasn't there. Neither was the vice president. This could present issues. With Jim Thorpe and Stanley Kofall gone, it was Art Ranney, the Akron Pros stationary-wielding co-manager, who started the meeting as the highest-ranked individual there, and thus was the acting president of the APFA, the second ever acting leader of the soon-to-be NFL, and he's often forgotten in that interim role because he held it for about 15 minutes. Old business may have been opened with the folding of the Chicago Tigers. This is news everyone was expecting and waiting for, but it's not terrible. Of the 14 squads last season, that's the only fold. It doesn't start getting dangerous until next year. Like 7 teams fold, it gets crazy. Different video. The most pressing old business we had to get to, though, was the crowning of last season's APFA champions. Fans seemed to agree on Akron, but Buffalo and Decatur had made their noise in the offseason. Did any of it make a difference in the eyes of the owners? When the issue was first brought up, the room went silent for a moment. Joseph Carr, owner of the Columbus Panhandles, the team that was home to football's famous Nesser brothers, was the one to speak up. I move that we award the World Professional Football Championship to the Akron professional team. Someone else, an unknown party to this day, seconded the motion. It was carried through a vote. No one in the room challenged the decision. Well, that was easy. The Akron Pros are officially your 1920 first ever
APFA champions. At this point, we can confirm through newspaper accounts from the time it happened right here at this meeting in late April of 1921, the Akron Pros were crowned. The trophy was awarded for the first time. It was awarded for the only time. Presumably, it was given to Art Ranny. He was the only representative of the Akron Pros listed at this meeting. Frank Need was seemingly absent, though I've seen some conflicting accounts, as was, per usual, the team's technical owner, Charles Stahl. This trophy was now in Art Ranny's possession. This meeting took place at an Akron hotel. He was close to home. The rest of the meeting happened, it went on and ended. The league had realized over the course of its first year that Jim Thorpe was a great athlete, but he wasn't a president figure. I mean, he wasn't even here today, probably busy with something important. We need an administrator who will devote themselves to this league. Joseph Carr will be elected. He'll later humbly say that it was against his will. It happened while he was out of the room. It's a bit ironic, because he was one of two owners who were absent at the APFA's first 1920 meeting, which his Columbus Panhandles were not represented in. Regardless, he will guide the sport from infancy to the cusp of dominance, along with leading them halfway into their segregation era. He'll stay in the president position until his death in 1939. 2 years later, the president role would evolve formally into the modern-day NFL commissioner. However, the changes made in the position from Jim Thorpe to Joseph Carr are larger than any other ever made. This, to me, is when the NFL got its commissioner. After this first year was the power shift. Later down the line, that was just the name shift. Jim Thorpe was basically there for decoration. He didn't do anything, and not to any fault of his own. I love Jim Thorpe. He was a player and never pretended that he was going to be anything else. And I don't think anyone was under the impression he would be an administrator. He was used solely for his popularity, to help the league gain some more of it, and it worked. Every time I talk about how comically unknown the APFA was, think about how much worse it would have been without Jim Thorpe attached. But now, after a year of mooching off his fame, the comical unorganization of the league had to be fixed. So that's it. The meeting adjourned. Everyone went home. The trophy was in this room, along with about 10 to 20 men. However, starting right here, we lost it. We have no idea where it went next. No recorded location of the trophy exists after this APFA meeting in April of 1921. Stretching to the year 2025, we've never seen it again. The trophy for the American Professional Football Association, which next year would change its name to the NFL, has been missing ever since. Trying to find where it went is a mission that could drive any normal person insane. Let's start with the most important facts. First and foremost, everyone forgot that the Akron Pros were named champions. Like, for real, there's nothing I could tell you that could serve as a better symbol for how unpopular this league was. For about 50 years, until the 1970s, nobody, including the NFL itself, knew who won its first ever championship. The whole time, according to the NFL's own record books, the 1920 champion was undecided. Now, let me be frank here. It's not challenging to find proof of the Akron Pros being awarded the APFA title at this late April meeting in 1921. Of course, I probably sound spoiled saying that. They didn't have online newspaper archives to just search by keyword through hundreds of years of records. You had to work a little harder to find it, maybe search through a library, but it existed. For over 5 decades, no one cared enough to look back. No one from the time cared enough to pass the word down a generation and keep the 1920 Akron Pros excellence as common knowledge. Hell, people who were at the meeting were still alive in the 70s. George Halas lived into the 80s, Fritz Pollard too. Art Ranny died in 1970, Frank Need just a year before that. No one even involved with the league or the team itself with the Akron Pros cared or remembered enough to correct the NFL.
And okay, I gotta get real off topic for a sec. This team group photo of the whole Akron Pros, it's cool, right? But I noticed something down there. Johnson. That's Pike Johnson labeled. Give me a second. Let me make a card. Okay, let's get back to trophy hunting.
It was in the 1970s that finally, somehow, record of the APFA agreeing to award them the title was rediscovered. They've been properly recognized ever since. We can infer that it was shortly after that time that the existence of the trophy was brought back into public conscious. Still, despite some hunting for the treasure, not a single lead exists on its whereabouts. No one knows what happened to it from that APFA meeting and on. And from all 104 years in between now and then, we have gotten nothing that points us anywhere. You could say we're getting more cold than hot. But what are we without hope? You have to have hope. I threw my hat into the ring. I tried to find the hunk of silver. I failed, just as all who came before me did. If I had found it, this video would have a much bigger budget. I've reached my own conclusions on where it is that I do genuinely believe, but I have found some things, at least one major bit of never-before-known information, and I sincerely hope this piece to the puzzle can help someone officially find the damn thing once and for all. It could even be one of you watching. It's worth a peek into your basement, attic, or crawl space, and it's much more worth a peek if you live in or around Akron, Ohio, because you never know. It could be $1 million peek. Before we get into possible theories, let's be sure to examine everything we have at our disposal. It's not very challenging to do that, because we don't have much. There's the mention of the trophy in the official, word-for-word, well-documented minutes of the league's first ever meeting in 1920. We already mentioned that a surprisingly and weirdly large amount of time was spent discussing the trophy. Included in articles from this time is the only known existing photo of the cup. This is all we have. The closest we can get to it today is looking at a century-old newspaper photo. One detail that I don't think is common knowledge, I didn't see it reported anywhere else, is the size of the cup. One of the papers that used this famous picture gave some broad words about it. Quote, "This picture is 1/6 of the actual size of the cup." Oh, I can work with that. Taking the two most common newspaper sizes in the States, broadsheet and tabloid, is a starting point. Tabloid really started taking over around this time, but it was more so used by popular papers. The Daily Times from Davenport, Iowa, I'm pretty confident in saying they were on broadsheet. The US broadsheet size is roughly 15 inches wide and 22.5 inches tall. Running some quick, rough estimations, it seems that the trophy would be about 24 inches tall, right at 2 feet, and its width would run around 20 inches handle to handle. Any mentions of the Silver Loving Cup then stop. Through play of the first APFA season in 1920, the thing is not mentioned at all in any way I can find recorded. We know sports writers often talked about games that were to determine the season's gridiron champion, but they never made mention of a trophy or a Silver Loving Cup that the teams were vying for. Before the 1921 meeting rolled around, some writers questioned who the league would name its champion. Some also, remember, questioned if the league still existed, but no one wondered about the trophy. After the meeting happened and it was awarded to Akron, it was included in a small number of papers and was a tiny detail at the end of the story. But the story was generally discussing the next season ahead of them, how they had stricter rules about college players and guys jumping team to team now, and then they would throw one last line in at the very end about how the Brunswick Bulk Colander Cup was awarded to the Akron Professionals. That is all we have for concrete info on the trophy. That's the only times we can confirm its location and existence. It was only ever talked about at or in relation to APFA League meetings in 1920 and 1921. What else do we have? Brunswick Bulk Colander is a mega company that, kinda funny, had their name misspelled on the official 1920 APFA meeting minutes after they donated the trophy to them. Now, Brunswick has been everywhere, man, and done everything. Of travel, they've had their share. Some of you may know them from the world of billiards, where the company got its start in 1845. You'd be hard-pressed to find a better quality and longer quantity manufacturer of pool table sticks and balls. A music fan might have their ear tickled upon hearing Brunswick, your mind darting to classic-era vinyl records and phonographs. Maybe you like the open waters. In more modern times, they've cut the bulk colander out of their name and are probably best known for their marine equipment, boats and engines and such. Or possibly you miss the golden age of bowling in America and thus miss the Brunswick alleys and commercials. This is a large, rich, historic company. It doesn't seem like any of this would have anything to do with the trophy they donated to the APFA. But you don't have to dig very deep into Brunswick Bulk Colander to find out they handed out trophies like candy on Halloween. Every sport, everywhere, all over the country, was getting silver loving cups donated by Brunswick to be given to the winner of that thing. They sponsored billiards tournaments, bowling league championships, making their own trophies to market their own products. This church basketball league got one. That looks like a fraternity bowling tournament over there. I mean, they gave one to the startup professional football league in Ohio. Need I say more? And that's just a tire. They made tires too. I forgot to mention that. But they took these trophies serious. I mean, it was part of their identity, and honestly, it's a pretty smart marketing tactic. Every pool or bowling tournament from the time would have professional cues and balls donated by Brunswick. There'd be cash prizes for the podium finishers, sponsored by Brunswick. And there'd be a big trophy that would have a big engraving on the side that said, Brunswick. Forced association. You can't do that thing. You can't even think of that thing without thinking of Brunswick. I like it. Sadly, this is bad news for us. It tells us that these trophies weren't special. It wasn't rare to get one. There was likely one or a couple factories pumping these things out. Again, they gave one to the APFA. It couldn't have been coveted. There are a ton of these random 1934 first place in a local 8-ball tournament trophies floating around. You can buy them online, go on eBay and look. However, small bit of good news. From what I've seen, the one given to the APFA was very unique. I honestly haven't seen a single other cup that I could mistake for this one. It's a weird shape. And here is some really good news. Who the hell is Mr. Marshall? Okay, I could have done a better job framing that as good news. A mystery man, someone we do not know at all, appears on the minutes of the first ever NFL League meeting. That's weird, and if we hadn't just been desensitized to weirdness for the last hour, I think it would be really weird. Anyone who's ever come across this missing trophy case has wondered who Mr. Marshall is. The most notable, though still unsuccessful, attempt to track the trophy down was a full-on effort made by the New York Times in 2021. I swear, I thought of the title for the video before I saw their article, and I did think about changing it, but it's catchy. But no one, not even them, has been able to identify where the trophy is, or who this mystery man with the last name Marshall is. No one until now. I didn't lose hope. I am 99% confident that I found the full identity of the man who donated the trophy to the league on behalf of the Brunswick Bulk Colander Company. He is one of like 2 people to be confirmed to have held the cup in his hands. He touched it. He is Lee Marshall. He works for the Brunswick Bulk Colander Company. On September 17th, 1920, he presented a trophy at the meeting that also served as the creation of the APFA. One day later, on September 18th, 1920, Lee Marshall was robbed. He was driving in an automobile along with 2 others when they were held up at gunpoint with revolvers aimed at their heads by some guys trying to steal alcohol. Liquor lookers, whiskey wanderers, beer browsers. We were months into Prohibition, and poor Lee Marshall of Brunswick is already getting robbed for booze. The article headline, Football Men Held Up by Hooch Hunters. Ooh, there's another one. Hooch Hunter. Yeah, that's good, yeah. Wait, hold on. Football men? Who was in the car with Lee Marshall? One passenger was Edwin Fritz. I am unable for the life of me to find out who that is. The other passenger was Stanley Kofall. The Stanley Kofall of the Cleveland Tigers. The Stanley Kofall that yesterday, September 17th, was elected as the vice president of the APFA. Stanley Kofall was in the car. That is not just Lee Marshall, that is Mr. Marshall, the immortally unknown mystery man from the first ever league meeting. This makes for one of the craziest and most appropriate to the time period stories in sports history. This is amazing that this happened. A day after the NFL was formed, its first ever vice president, a random company rep from Brunswick, and some other guy were robbed at gunpoint for liquor on their way home from the league meeting during Prohibition. This is football. It would have been a great Prohibition-era addition to my last video, but, this wasn't known when I posted the last video. It seems pretty for sure to me. I mean, it calls them football men. It says they were returning to Cleveland from Canton, where they were at a meeting. Hilariously, so on brand for the time, they're reported as attending a meeting for the American College Football Association, the ACFA, but, well, yeah, that never existed. They were at the APFA meeting. They were forming the NFL, and no one knew or cared enough about that to get the name right. This might be the most rewarding article I have ever stumbled upon. Another funny detail, they got robbed because they had stuffed newspapers inside of their jackets to keep warm on their drive. The robbers, and there were 7 of them, saw that and thought it was a bad way of hiding homemade bootlegged liquor, so they sprung. It was a disappointing crime to commit when they found no alcohol. But here's maybe a crazy thought. This was after the first meeting, the birth of the league in 1920. The trophy had just been revealed and presented to the APFA yesterday. Like I said earlier, we don't know what happened with the trophy during the course of this final season before Akron won it. With the league vice president and the guy who brought the medal in the same car, I don't think it's crazy to assume that the Brunswick Bulk Colander Cup was in the car at the time of this robbery. I say that with absolutely no proof, but it does make sense. This is a big deal. We're the first to take the mask off of Mr. Marshall, an NFL mystery that is literally as old as the NFL. Unfortunately, I couldn't get anywhere else off of this lead. Hopefully, it now being out there, public knowledge, it can further someone else's research in the future. But yeah, I tried and failed to find any more information, even an obituary on Lee Marshall, the Brunswick employee from Cleveland. But I haven't lost hope. With that, we can move on to actual suspects. We can easily throw a few names up. First and most obvious, Art Ranney. He accepted the trophy on behalf of the Akron Pros the day of that second annual meeting in 1921 when they awarded it to him. He likely took it home. He was the only representative of the Akron Pros at the meeting. Again, it's unclear where the trophy was during that season or who brought it to the second meeting, but all signs point to Art's hands being the ones it ended up with after. You could call him the last person to see the victim alive. Crazy theory, and we're going to start getting a lot of these. Maybe Art never took it. The trophy being awarded was nothing close to a big deal. Quick mention in a few papers, nothing more. Is it possible at all that everyone agreed, trophy goes to the Akron Pros, gave a round of applause, and then we all got up to leave and Art Ranney drove home without it? Maybe he forgot it in the Akron hotel. Maybe he didn't care about it and made the conscious decision to leave it. The next easy names are Frank Neat, the team's co-manager alongside Art, and Charles Stahl, the actual owner of the squad. I don't think it was him. He doesn't seem to have been involved enough to take the trophy, but worth including. Frank Need is a solid suspect, nothing more. We don't have anything tying him to the cup, and he wasn't at the meeting where Akron was awarded it. But after Randy, he would be the next most obvious person to make it the centerpiece of his living room. In their investigation, the New York Times did try visiting his old cigar shops to see if Frank was letting the trophy hang out with the community in Akron, but most of them have been torn down by now and no leads were found. I would throw Fritz Pollard's name up as a possibility, and I still will, but I think this one's unlikely. See, Fritz lived a long life, and near the end of it, he was starting to be recognized for how crucial of a role he played in football's history. He did a lot of press and interviews and talked to the NFL a ton in his older years, and I just can't imagine he got through all that while still hiding the trophy. It would have to be intentional. And what reason would you ever have to hide it on purpose? Well, actually, I take that back. Of all the people who would like to screw with the NFL, Fritz Pollard isn't low on the list. We can make him a little bigger. And because it needs to be brought up, let me fight one more battle on behalf of Fritz. This sucks. From the 1920 APFA season, a total of 11 guys have been inducted into the Hall of Fame. 10 players and one Joseph Carr, the new president. Fritz Pollard is on the list. That's good, but go ahead and sort these guys by the year they were put into the Hall. 1963 isn't a coincidence. That was the first ever class, and within 3 quick years, they got all the guys from their founding year in. All of them except Fritz. It insultingly took 40 more years for the man to be inducted than his peers. Even worse, Fritz Pollard died in 1986. He didn't get to see his own induction, and had to watch his friends, well, not friends, his acquaintances. Okay, people he happened to know get inducted before him. He had to watch the guy that jump-started NFL segregation get honored before him. Hell, Fritz Pollard died in a world where O.J. Simpson was in the Hall of Fame, and he was not. Here's a couple names I don't see brought up enough, and I think that's because people don't learn enough about the 1920 Akron pros before they start researching like we just did. We know they had enemies. George Halas of the Decatur Staleys and Frank McNeil of the Buffalo All-Americans each had motive. Could they have been so ticked off about Akron being named champions that one of them stole the cup? It's possible. Sadly, I kinda ask these questions rhetorically because I've tried to look. There's no answers to any of them. Again, any mention of the Brunswick Balt Colander Cup just falls off the face of the earth for like the next half century. No one was wondering about it, questioning its whereabouts. No one cared or knew to. George Halas is actually interesting. His Staleys won the 1921 APFA championship in the next season after a controversy with these Buffalo All-Americans, funny enough. He basically did the same thing he tried doing with the pros by scheduling another game at the end of the year, and it worked that time. His Staleys won and were awarded the championship. That's true. And what is now considered a little weird to people who go trophy hunting like myself is that the cup was never brought up again in the minutes of the league meeting. In the 1922 meeting, when the APFA would vote to crown the Staleys champions for the 1921 season, that was it. They just voted and acknowledged they were champions. No one questioned where the big trophy they were supposed to receive was. George Halas never asked for it. Did the entire league just forget about it over the course of a year? Because that is weird. It seems like something George would love to make a fuss about. That very same meeting, he snitched on a new team for breaking league rules. The team would be kicked out of the league, then fight back and rejoin, and the team was the Green Bay Packers, kickstarting the rivalry between them and George's soon-to-be Chicago Bears. Why did no one notice that the trophy disappeared? Could George Halas have already had it in his living room at home after stealing it last year because he thought he deserved it? Was he okay with keeping his mouth shut because he didn't want anyone to put together the fact that he took it? He could have swooped it right from that Akron hotel, and I doubt Art Rainey would have cared enough to notice. Nothing is impossible. I think those are the best candidates we have. The next natural step would be to trace out some family trees because all of these people are dead, and that information is way too easy to find. This is exactly what the New York Times did, and this is where their investigation gets real good, because they have the ability to do more than I ever could. They had people on the ground in Akron going doorstep to doorstep. Like I said earlier, they combed through Frank Need's old cigar shop addresses, most of them well torn down by now, a few still standing. Families were contacted and asked about the whole thing. Many descendants were familiar with the story. There's probably some great family urban legends, but none had any idea where the cut might be. At least, that's what they said. I don't know. I think it would be a pretty cool family secret for the Ranny family to be hiding it somewhere. But honestly, it's unlikely they are. It's unlikely anyone who knows what it is knows where it is. That's due to one simple reason. If found, this trophy will be worth millions. It's been referred to in the last couple decades as the holy grail of sports memorabilia. The hypothetical price tag for the first trophy of what would become the NFL is endless. Not just that, but the league didn't create a championship game for over a decade. 1933 was the first instance, and the year after that, they finally created another trophy for the league. The Ed Thorpe Memorial Trophy ran from 1934 all the way to 1967 when the current Lombardi Trophy entered the room. The Ed Thorpe was a traveling trophy like the Stanley Cup. There was only one, and it got passed team to team. Though thought to be lost for a while, in 2015 it was discovered that the Green Bay Packers had literally just lost it, and it was in a few big pieces scattered around their buildings. This is actually a messed up story because the Minnesota Vikings, who were supposedly the last team to win it, were for a long time blamed for being the ones to lose it, even though they never got it. The Packers just didn't give it to them. And there was like a thing called the Ed Thorpe curse. The guy that the trophy's named after cursed them for losing his trophy, even though it was really on the Packers the whole time. And then the Packers kept it for some reason. Like, didn't give it to the Vikings, and that would have been kind of weird, but it should be in the Hall of Fame. The Packers have already lost it once. Why would we trust them with it again? I'm sorry, I get really upset when I talk about people losing old sports trophies and getting to keep them once they find where they lost them. So we have that, and there's no missing Lombardi trophies. Everyone has theirs on display. The Brunswick Balt Colander Cup is the missing piece of the puzzle. It would complete the NFL picture. A good-hearted American would pay everything for this. So I don't think it's being hidden, unless it's by someone really rich, because they would have given in to greed and auctioned it off by now. As for other theories, well, you kind of have the world as your sandbox, your imagination as the limit. Your mind is a tool, and Akron, Ohio as a starting point. Maybe it's holding colored pencils on a kindergarten teacher's desk, a flower vase in an old couple's home. It could be sitting upright, dusty with a web or two on it in somebody's attic. It's worth a check, seriously. Do it for me, please. I think that's our best bet. Well, that's our best happy bet, I should say. Sadly, what I feel is the most obvious answer to the question of where is the trophy is at the bottom of a garbage compactor, trash incinerator thingy spread out in maybe like 2 million piles of fragments and ashes. Hell, maybe the thing knew how special it was. Maybe it was melted down for scrap metal used in World War II and shipped off overseas. Maybe it saw the world. Maybe it was a hero. Funny enough, professional baseball has a lost trophy too, called the DeVry Cup, though no one really cares because it was from the World Series games of the National League versus the American Association, and as we know, nobody really cares about the Beer and Whiskey League anymore, so those games aren't really seen as too important. But this, well, yeah, it is the Holy Grail. The real question is, if we find it, what do we do with it? We could give it to the Akron Pros franchise, but that would be challenging, being that they folded 99 years ago. That'll be a sad centennial. I guess the Hall of Fame in Canton is the natural answer, the same town it was presented to in the league in one of its 2 recorded public appearances. Put it right next to Fritz Pollard's name in the Hall of Fame. If you want to get technical, well, the original minutes state that whoever won the trophy 3 times got it permanently. This was, funny enough, sort of a common clause baked into super early sports trophies, including an MLB one. Now, the Brunswick Cup was only won a single time, But by those rules, the first team to win 3 APFA/NFL championships would be the Green Bay Packers. If you want to get realistic, it would be sold to a guy that's richer than you. But who knows? Who knows at all, really?
I don't think that trophy's out there. I think it's sitting in a few pieces at the bottom of a decades-old pile of scraps and metal. I don't think it'll ever be found. Hell, I know it'll never be found. I call that common sense. But I tell you what, I'm gonna keep looking. I call that hope. So let's be honest. Without that, what do we got?